Good morning, everyone. Well, here we are again to read some poems which I hope we can all enjoy and perhaps learn from. This week, I got interested in allegory, and so I thought about all the literary books I've read that might be called allegories. The list was not hugely long, but included such famous books as Orwell's Animal Farm, getting scarily close to the world we are living in right now, sad to say. And then, of course, the C.S. Lewis books, such as The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe, and the Narnia series. And then, much earlier in my life, I read Moby Dick and didn't know at that time that it was an allegory. I'm sure you can think of many more, such as maybe William Golding's Lord of the Flies, that are also allegorical. And then in our art world, particularly during the Renaissance, we note that there are all kinds of paintings that are allegorical and sculptures. But of course, it is no wonder that I've got to turn this music down a little bit. Hang on. There's no wonder that Billy Collins took on the world of allegories in a poem called The Death of Allegory. I am wondering what became of all those tall abstractions that used to pose robed and statuesque in paintings and parade about on the pages of the Renaissance, displaying their capital letters like license plates. Truth, cantering on a powerful horse. Chastity, eyes downcast, fluttering with veils. Each one was marble come to life, a thought in a coat. Courtesy, bowing with one hand always extended. Villainy, sharpening an instrument behind a wall. Reason, with her crown, and constancy, alert behind a helm. They are all retired now, consigned to a Florida for tropes. Justice is there, standing by an open refrigerator. Valor lies in bed listening to the rain. Even death has nothing to do but mend his cloak and hood, and all their props are locked away in a warehouse, hourglasses, globes, blindfolds, and shackles. Even if you called them back, there are no places left for them to go. No garden of mirth or bower of bliss. The valley of forgiveness is lined with condominiums, and chainsaws are howling in the forest of despair. Here on the table near the window is a vase of peonies, and next to it, black binoculars and a money clip. Exactly the kind of thing we now prefer, objects that sit quietly on a line in lowercase. Themselves and nothing more. A wheelbarrow, an empty mailbox, a razor blade resting in a glass ashtray. As for the others, the great ideas on horseback and the long-haired virtues in embroidered gowns, it looks as though they have traveled down the road you see in the final pages of storybooks, the one that winds up a green hillside and disappears into an unseen valley where everyone must be fast asleep. I love that poem. But then I like most of Billy Collins' work. Now then, we're going to have a complete change of subject. You recall that last week I read poems by two Kansas poets, which were commentaries on the life and work of Emily Dickinson, but I didn't bother to read any of Emily's poetry, so I'll make up for that today. How can one ever snub the modest Emily Dickinson, who didn't even give names to most of her poems? The names were added later to some of them, but not all, by her postmortem publisher. Kind of sad, but that sort of describes the mood of many of her poems. I have this book of Emily Dickinson's selected poems, which of course she really didn't publish during her lifetime. It was later on that they came into being. Here's one that has no name, but you will figure it out soon enough. There's been a death in the opposite house as lately as today. I know it by the numb look such houses have always. The neighbors rustle in and out. The doctor drives away. A window opens like a pod, abrupt, mechanically. Somebody flings a mattress out. The children hurry by. They wonder if it died on that. I used to when a boy. The minister goes stuffily in as if the house were his, and he owned all the mourners now, and little boys besides. And then the milliner and the man of the appalling trade to take the measure of the house. There'll be that dark parade of tassels and of coaches soon. It's easy as a sign, the intuition of the news in just a country town. Now that's a perfectly constructed poem, and you can see how different it is from the poems of her recent contemporaries, such as Longfellow. Big, long fellows those poems were. Then here's another one, which has been titled, it's called The Battlefield. They dropped like flakes, they dropped like stars, like petals from a rose, when suddenly across the June a wind with fingers goes. They perished in the seamless grass. No eye could find the place, but God in his repealless list can summon every face. And then one more here. I went to heaven. 'Twas a small town lit with a ruby, lathed with down. Stiller than the fields at the full dew, beautiful as pictures no man drew, people like the moth of Mechlin, frames, duties of gossamer, and eider names, almost contented I could be 'mong such unique society. Well, my only complaint about Emily Dickinson, and it has nothing to do with the wonderful quality of her poetry, which has inspired the kind of brief, tight, well-constructed verses that we see so often nowadays. But Emily's very dreek. Dreek is a great Scots word that describes kind of a downer, kind of sad and lonely poems, and you know, it's something to think about her life. Emily never married. She was alone in a big house. Her father was gone, and he was the master of the house in many ways. And he was at work. And so Emily spent a lot of her days sewing and then writing her wonderful poems, inspired by her thoughts that came from her reading and her observations of the world around her, like the story about the impending funeral next door, the house next door. She knew everything that was going on. So Emily Dickinson has a reputation nowadays that is hard to top in the world of poetry. Often we like to think that the poetry we see in books is the carved and final versions, never again to be altered, but this is really not so. Many poets alter their work between editions or after it has been appeared in a magazine but now is set to be in a book. Several examples of this are found in a wonderful book by Crowe Ransom. This is selected poems of Crowe Ransom, and I've read you some of his poetry before, but in addition to his work as a poet, he also was the editor of a famous literary magazine in his day called the Kenyon Review, and he taught at Kenyon College, which is where the name came from. And in this lovely book, he critiques and rewrites some of his early poems. And I've never seen a book by a poet that did it this way, but he was a teacher, and he still has things that he can teach us as poems and poets and teachers. This book was bought for me by my late wife, Marcia, and she signed it and dated it Boston, 1978. We were there for a medical meeting, and while I was in the meeting learning a lot of boring medical facts, she was out looking through bookstores, which Boston has plenty of, and she found this book because she knew I loved the poetry of Crowe Ransom. But we're going to dissect and rewrite today in this book. Actually, Crowe Ransom is going to do the work. And the poem is one of my favorites by him. Excuse me. It's called Here Lies a Lady. And he has a version A and a version B. I'm going to start with version A, and then we'll see what his comment is about it. And this is the poem that I was introduced to some 25 years before version B was ever written. Here lies a lady of beauty and high degree. Of chills and fever she died, of fever and chills. The delight of her husband, her aunt, an infant of 3, and of medicos, marveling sweetly on her ills. For either she burned and her confident eyes would blaze, and her fingers fly in a manner to puzzle their heads. What was she making? Why, nothing. She sat in a maze of old scraps of laces, snipped into curious shreds. Or this would pass, and the light of her fire decline, till she lay discouraged and cold, like a thin stalk, white and blown, and would not open her eyes to kisses, to wine. The sixth of these states was her last. The cold settled down. Sweet ladies, long may ye bloom, and toughly I hope ye may thole. But was she not lucky? In flowers and lace and mourning, in love and great honor, we bade God rest her soul, after 6 little spaces of chill, and 6 of burning. I always thought that was one of my favorite poems, but now listen to the comments of the poet. The poem was first published in my Poems and Essays, 1945. The B poem will follow, and its lines correspond so closely to the A lines that I need not detail what I consider to be the better phrases of B. But I must note that the second line of stanza 3 here, meaning version A, is a hexameter instead of the standard pentameter of the poem, and contains a very dubious phrase, like a thin stalk, white and blown, which hardly describes the image of a beautiful woman, even in her ravage. In stanza 4, the first line is another hexameter, and the archaic ye may be a little too quaint. Okay, now, here's version B, and you'll have to decide which of the two versions you think is best. And we'll let the poet comment about version B as well as he has done on version A. Here lies a lady of beauty and high degree, of chills and fever she died, of fever and chills, the delight of her husband and aunt, an infant of 3 and medicos, marveling sweetly on her ills. First she was hot, and her brightest eyes would blaze, and the speed of her flying fingers shook their heads. What was she making? God knows. She sat in those days with her newest gowns all torn or snipped into shreds. But that would pass, and the fire of her cheeks decline, till she lay dishonored and wan like a rose overblown, and would not open her eyes to kisses, to wine, the sixth of which states was final. The cold came down. Fair ladies, long may you bloom, and sweetly may thole. She was part lucky, with flowers and lace and mourning, with love and bravado. We bade God rest her soul, after 6 quick turns of quaking, 6 of burning. Now, those two poems are, of course, like a lot alike, but there are some major changes, especially in the last 3 stanzas of version B. The poet's comment is as follows. The opening stanzas of A and B are alike. In the later stanzas of B, B is far superior. The second stanza has the lady sitting among her newest gowns and destroying them, but there may be 2 interpretations. She may be planning to get a new wardrobe when she has recovered from her illness. That seems at first the sign of a great lady's vanity. Why is she not talking with her husband and her child? The aunt, of course, may be hundreds of miles away, but she must occupy herself somehow while she can, and her husband is a wealthy and busy man. He cannot attend her at all times, while her child is forbidden her bedside. The third stanza, where chill replaces fever, is almost unutterably painful, but I was most intent upon it and managed to the best of my ability. Lines 2 and 3 are the saddest in the poem, perhaps in all my poems. Line 2 has her lying dishonored and wan like a rose overblown, where the two phrases almost rhyme. Line 3 has her at the very point of death, and line 4 announces the ultimate fact of her death. In stanza 4, the only thing the friends and relatives can do is bring their tokens of affection to the coffin. But these are supplemented in line 3 with love and bravado when they ask God to rest her soul. The bravado may seem strange until we reflect that any prayer has that constituent, inasmuch as it is addressed to an unknown God whose designs we cannot thwart. The final line is new and fresh after the 20-odd years' service of the A line, and lines 3 and 4 together supply, I suppose, two reasons why she was part lucky: because of the devotion of her loyal subjects, and then because of the brevity of her illness. So there you have not only two poems on the same subject, but the poet's own critical remarks about why the changes were made and why he feels that version B is the better. One could mention other poets who changed their work, but we are running out of time. I hope all this today was helpful to all of us poetry lovers, and maybe some of you will look up poems that have two versions and can figure out, with or without the poet's help, why you like one better than the other. Now, please join me again next week. I hope you will, when we will have completely different subject matter. But no hints from me today on that. Bye now, and enjoy your week.